What's up, everybody? It's time for episode 2 of me rating all the shows that I hadn't rated yet on my anime list. If anybody was wondering about the order that these are listed in, like why it seems kind of random, it's by the number that they were added to my anime list. Like Cowboy Bebop was the first show listed on Mal, and so like when you organize stuff in like a way like this, like organize it by type, it lists them by when they were added to my anime list. Just a fun fact: every show has a number, which is why as this goes, we'll gradually like at some point all newer shows are below a certain threshold, you know, like where everything else had already been added. Anyways, welcome back to the show that we're going to be doing half an hour every other day. I'm pretty sick, so I sound like shit. Hopefully you're okay with that. We're going to pick up from where we left off with Blood Plus. This was a show that's a 50-episode adventure series from Production IG that has its moments, it has heights, and it has lows, and in between is very meh. It's very boring because Blood Plus, first of all, had no reason to be 50 episodes. I remember like a huge swath of the episodes are just like way too slow, like just setting up like exposition for entire episodes that didn't need to be that detailed. Just like really slow scenes for an action show. When it did have action, it's insanely bloody, but it doesn't really have much horror element, which the original film was, more of a horror film with action elements as opposed to vice versa. This is more of just like a slashing bloodbath kind of thing. It kind of feels like it almost didn't need to be so like dark and gory. It's like they used the fact that it was part of the Blood franchise to get away with that, but then like the story feels pretty juvenile and the characters are all like teenagers, so it's almost weird that it has this like obscenely bloody atmosphere. And it's a story that like there's parts where it starts to get good, like episode 30 something, like some really fucked up stuff happens, and then there's a time skip. Post time skip, the show just goes straight down to shit. It's like, it's one of those where after a time skip, the characters are all kind of not exactly the same characters you knew before, so it feels like awkward to be with them. There's just lots of obnoxious misunderstandings, lots of treading water until the ending. I remember the ending being good, but like the 10 or so episodes leading up to it were like really bad. And since the show was never amazing in the first place, like it really feels like dragged down by those episodes. So I'd say this is one I'd probably end up giving like a 5. Like it has good things about it. It's well produced. It has good OPs and shit, but like it has a lot of problems. Maria Sama ga Miteru. This is one of the OG big Yuri franchises. It's kind of like, I want to say the franchise that popularized the modern style of Yuri. Popularized the, what I call, Yuritopia stories, where basically you've got a high school, an all-girls high school where everybody's a lesbian. That's not as true of this show as it is of some later ones, but like they're basically everyone's a lesbian. And, but it takes place in a Christian school, so it's very chaste, it's very slow moving. A lot of the show is steeped in like platitudes and social communication and stuff like that. So, it's not really like a romance drama. It's more of like a drama with light trimmings of Yuri romance underneath to tease at you and all that. But it goes on for a number of seasons, so I'm sure we're going to encounter further seasons as we go. I remember the first time I watched this, I felt like I didn't, like I appreciated it more than I liked it, because it is, again, very slow. And, like, I remember thinking that, like, the characters were well written and everything, and it is a good series, but it's not the most exciting. I don't know how I'd feel about it today. I want to say I'd probably give it a 7. Like, that's the kind of memory I have of it. But I'm not sure. Razafon. Razafon is the weird mech show, the one that took it farther than Evangelion did. I think Razafon was rightly compared to Eva a lot because they're both weird mech shows, but Razafon definitely pulls from other influences, whereas like Eva is very like um like Gundam and Ideon and Devilman. Razafon, people always say, is basically Raydeen and some other older mech shows, but like it obviously is also pulling from Ava. There's a lot of like scenes that are practically the same in both shows, but Razafon goes even farther on being like really fucking weird and having like really out there mecha designs, and like the story doesn't entirely make sense, and there's like a large section of episodes where there's like a different director on every episode doing something completely different, which is the most interesting part of the show, like the mid-teen episodes where each one is like its own little adventure that almost doesn't have to do with the main story, and then it all wraps up in a really confusing fucking package. Razafon's one of those shows that I feel like is more interesting than it is good. Like, there's definitely parts that are really good, and then parts that are just kind of like um, try hard, maybe even pretentious. But like, uh, it's an interesting show. I would definitely say it's worth having seen, and I'd be curious to revisit it because I haven't seen it in a long time. I'm gonna say I'd probably give it like a 6 or 7, because even though there's a lot of episodes that I think are really interesting, there's also just the overall experience I feel like would leave me without much takeaway, you know? At least that's how I felt last time I watched it. Scrapped Princess. This is an interesting, a very interesting and strange show because it's like a high fantasy show about a princess who's on the run, with her two attendants, trying to flee her home country, and it's kind of like the characters are entertaining, and it's got a very like early 2000s feel to it. Um, it's kind of a fun show, but not really much going on in the early episodes. It keeps like hinting at the plot that's gonna happen, but then like it takes a long time to actually get there. Then there's like a big twist, and then it you know turns out like I guess it's kind of building this in the background throughout the show that like this is like a post-apocalyptic world. Like there was a massive rise in technology, but then everything got destroyed, and so this fantasy world is kind of built on the ruins of a previous society. Um, so it does some stuff with that. It has some twisty turny stuff in the plot before resolving, and like overall I remember thinking it was okay. Like, it didn't leave much of an impression on me. I know there are some people who, like, really love this story, but I'm not entirely sure why. I don't know what about, like, what depth they found in it that I didn't. But, I'd probably give it, like, a 6. If not a 5, because I don't know if I'd be harsher on this show if I saw it now, or if I'd like it more than I remember. I'm not sure. But I remember some of the things that annoyed me about the series, and I feel like I'd probably give it a 5. s.cry.ed. This is a fucking extremely hot-blooded, fun action show that really, I think, borrows more from like American comics almost than anime. Like when I was doing that history video where I was like going back through Evangelion and like all the shows that came after it and all the weird shit, s.cry.ed kind of stood out as like this really like bombastic action series about guys with superpowers that wasn't really trending in Japan like before or after the show. And the stuff that I would think of that feels the most similar to it would be shit like Tiger and Bunny or Boku no Hero Academia, like stuff that's inspired by American comics. So I feel like it's closer to that feel, because it's very much a superhero story. Everyone has a specific weird power. I guess it's really an X-Men parallel is the most, because they're mutants and they have like a mutant skill. So yeah, like it's sort of an X-Men style thing, and the main character is just this fucking angry punk who's got an awesome arm that punches shit, and it's really cool. And there's lots of great action. There's lots of really inventive powers. Sometimes the show can get like weird with its powers and have like trippy episodes. Um, it's got a pretty standard build in the story where it's like, it starts small, it keeps getting bigger, there's a final confrontation, a big boss, and then like a resolution episode. So like it's a very standard story structure, but it does it well, and it has some really memorable characters. I'd say it's a pretty fucking solid show. I'd probably give it like a strong 7 to a light 8. I don't know if it has like the consistency across the whole show. Like it's one of those, I have a problem with shows that eventually just become we have to beat the final boss. Like when you've I feel like in a lot of 26 episode shows, especially from this era, the early part of the show is the most interesting, where it's like setting up all the characters, setting up the world. You're getting to see different angles, different sides of the conflict. And then it's, the build up where things are getting more serious and more drama's happening. And then at some point you get to where it's like, okay, here's the final boss. Here's the guys you have to fight on the way. And you got to go save the world, And then it's just kind of like 5 or 6 episodes of let's go do that. And that tends to be where shows lose me. Same with films, like American superhero films. Usually that's the point where I get like, okay, I don't care anymore, when it gets like the big final battle. But s.cry.ed is a good version of that kind of story, so I'd still say it's definitely worth watching. It's a lot of fun. Shingetsu Tansukihime, the anime that doesn't exist. This was an adaptation of the first Type Moon visual novel, Tsukihime, which is like a 50-hour game, and they tried to cram it into a 12-episode show. So people who love the game absolutely hate this show because it cuts out so much information. It's like a really watered-down version of the story, and there's a big meme that it doesn't exist. Now, I watched this show and I thought it was pretty okay. Like, it's kind of unremarkable, and I guess that's really the problem. Like, it's a competently made show. It's fairly entertaining. It has a complete story in it. It's just not the complete Tsukihime story. So, again, it feels very watered down, I guess, from what the original would have been. But it's still an okay show. I think I'd given it like a 6 at the time. I'd probably still give it a 6 going on what I remember, which is not much, to be honest. I just remember it being competent. And like kind of interesting because of the powers and stuff that I'm sure are fleshed out much more strongly in the game. So like, yeah, I don't think it's a bad anime. It's just a bad Tsukihime adaptation, which is why people are so adamantly pissed off about it. The Vision of Escaflowne. This is a show I really want to rewatch because I was quite torn about it, and I had I used to have a review of it up here on Mal, but I think I took it down because old as fuck, and I try not to hold on to too many of my old writings on somewhere like Mal. But Escaflowne, I'd given it like a 6 out of 10 because of the fact that the early episodes are amazing. Like, this show starts off like really, really high tier action fantasy. It's an older isekai show about a young girl who is sent to another world, and she's got like some kind of vague psychic abilities. And she teams up with the prince of a kingdom which has just been overthrown, and that the prince activates the mecha Escaflowne. It's a high fantasy mecha series, and they've got this badass mech, which is like an ancient guardian deity or whatever of their kingdom. And they're fighting against mechs from the bad guys, and there's like this evil empire that's basically trying to take over all the kingdoms. And so the girl and the guy, and they team up with another dude who's like sort of a pretty boy swashbuckler kind of guy, and the three of them are on an adventure, and like the villain is really entertaining. The main characters are all great. The animation is fucking incredible. It's got like awesome fight choreography, some of the best mecha action that was fucking available. It's a Sunrise show from like from the early 90s, so like it's a beautiful mecha action series. Then it completely falls apart because it was supposed to be a 39 episode show and it got cut down to 26, and they really start just like pretty much in the early teen episodes, it starts cranking through exposition because it's like there's a lot they had to get to that they don't have time for. So they find every excuse to have a big exposition dump. Then it starts jumping through character arcs really erratically, where like there's a part where one of the characters is like mind controlled by the enemy and he becomes like totally like nothing like his character before, and it's just really unentertaining to watch. All the relationships between the characters kind of break down, and it just feels weird. And there's a point in the show where like I was so sick of the main characters, I actually wanted the villains to win. But then towards the end, it then tries to rush through a relationship between the main characters that had never really been set up throughout the show. Like all of a sudden, two of them are in love with each other who it had never really been suggested they were before. And like I could see how this would have made sense with 13 more episodes to build these two falling in love, but it really just comes out of nowhere. And like the ending is okay as a resolution, but like it's one of those things where by that point so much of it had felt off that it just doesn't even work for me anymore. So like there's an amazing show in there, but there's also a shit show that it becomes, and it's really disappointing. So I don't know if rewatching it would make me more forgiving, because sometimes that happens. Like Kare Kano, which we already passed by on this list, but because I had already scored it, infamously has the last 8 episodes are kind of shit because the director left the project, and the last 8 episodes are really slow and not nearly as inventive as what came before, and it has no real ending. And like rewatching the show, I felt like episode 18 was a great climax, and I didn't need it to keep going after that point. And so looking at the other 8 episodes, like they weren't even bad. They're just much worse than what came before. So it was a disappointment to have like no real ending and like to not see that coming. But once I knew it was coming, it wasn't nearly as big of a deal. So I'm wondering if Escaflowne, if I can like set aside, okay, I know where this is going to go. I know it's going to be a disappointment. Like maybe it won't hurt as much. But it's hard to say, because like I do want to say this is a good show worth watching just because those first 13 episodes are so much fun, and like there's nothing else that'll really give you the same thing. Like this really beautiful action like mecha fantasy show. I want to say it's similar to something like Shingeki no Bahamut, which is also a show that gets really disappointing. So it's like it's hard to say. Like there's none that's ever done it just right all the way through that I can think of. Okay, Read or Die the TV. So Read or Die was this awesome 3-episode OVA that came out in the mid 2000s. Beautifully animated. It aired on Adult Swim a couple times. I think they just broadcast it as like a film because it might as well be. And it's fucking cool as shit. It has awesome... Mostly it's known for the superpowers of the characters, because it's about a woman who's a bibliophile, and she uses paper. She can manipulate paper. And she does all kinds of fun shit with that, like, for instance, flying on a giant paper plane is, like, the most iconic image of it. And then there's like another character who can ghost through walls. Everyone's really sexy. It's got kind of a James Bond spy thriller thing, but like on an epic anime scale. And it's really cool. So then they made a TV show out of it. Now the TV show, rather than focus on the same characters as the OVA, creates these 3 sisters who all use paper powers. And they're living with this woman who's an author for whatever reason. And there's lots of Yuri hints, basically. And it's kind of the same thing, but like stretched out to be a 26-episode TV show. So there's a lot less of the like what made the OVA so great is that it's this fast, punchy, really imaginative story that just like rattles through and it's over. And it's like, whoa, where the fuck did that come from? It was so cool. Read or Die the TV kind of misses the point by stretching it out to a whole show. So it's not bad though. Like it's pretty entertaining. The characters are fine. I liked all the Yuri shipping. The animation's still pretty great when it wants to be. And like the early episodes have much more of like a slice of life feel, and then it like develops a story. It's another one where it's like, you know, it's the standard 26-episode action show formula. It builds until there's a villain, and then they fight the villain and they save the world kind of thing. Which it's funny. I feel like a lot of people miss this kind of show. Like there's a lot of people who question why modern anime doesn't have more of these like standard story structures. Frankly, if you go back and watch all the ones from the 2000s, like not only are like most of them like you'll not only will you get sick of the formula, but like most of them ended up being disappointing because like anime just has a problem with trying to create a good final conflict. Most of these shows would drop the ball around like episode like basically the second half of the show. Like whenever they try to build towards something bigger, that would be when the show kind of starts falling apart or becomes bland and uninteresting. And Read or Die didn't have it so bad. I'd probably give this show a 6 if I watched it. I think that's what I gave it at the time anyways. But like there's others that we'll get to that like just totally fucking fall apart as soon as they try to be like a real story. And like there was a lot of shows like this in the mid 2000s. A lot of shows that just did 26 episodes and it's a standard story structure, and most of them aren't that memorable. Most of them don't hold up all that well. You know, some of them do something a little bit more interesting, like Wolf's Rain, which you can see here, which is like more of a tone piece and has a really sad ending, and the ending's like by far the best part of that show. But like even then, I don't think the show is all that fucking worthwhile. So yeah, I don't know. It's a real mixed bag. These fucking 2000s action shows. Ranma One Half. Ranma One Half, the longest show I've finished, I think. 161 episodes. Holy fuck. I spent like 2 weeks watching this show nonstop. It was after one of the Otakons, and I was still learning about older shows, and like you'll notice I haven't completed a whole ton of older shows. Like most of what I've completed is from the 2000s or the 2010s. Occasionally you get something from the 90s, but usually not long. And very rarely will you see anything from the 80s or 70s on my list because I just never finish them. Ranma was one where like I was getting interested in older shows. I'd seen some stuff from it at Otakon and I was getting kind of interested. So I decided to just binge the whole thing. And Ranma has one of the most complicated trajectories of quality that is out there. Because, first of all, a hell of a lot of the show is filler. And even in spite of that, it doesn't manage to reach the end of the manga. It doesn't manage to have the conclusion. So, it 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 changes directors several times as well. And depending on who is the star of an episode, it can either be great or fucking horrible. So the whole first season, the first like 16 episodes or so, like this is season as broken up by like it's not listed in seasons here on Mal, but like if you look at the American releases and stuff, like it's listed by season, and like it was released kind of seasonally in Japan. Um the first season is great. Like it's a fun, inventive rom-com series. You know, it's a high school rom-com. It's not like it's not fucking breaking new ground or anything, but it's from Rumiko Takahashi, who kind of laid a lot of the groundwork of what these shows are. Like if you've seen any of these love comedy harem-ish shows where it's like everyone's in love with someone else and it's like a giant love polygon, like she basically like popularized that style of story that still survives to this day. Like if you're watching something like what the fuck was the show called? The Secret, the one where the girl's secretly a vampire. Like that's a very Ranma show. Like everyone has one specific personality quirk, one weird superpower, and they're all in love with the wrong person. And that's Ranma. But the first season of Ranma is presented like a little bit more like a contemporary drama. Like it's not as fast paced. It's still really funny, but like it takes its dramatic moments very seriously. It feels like there's a sense of progress with the characters. Like uh Akane, the main girl, is a like old school tsundere. She starts off absolutely hating Ranma, but as the season goes, they start to develop feelings for each other. It feels like there's a constant sense of like this is going somewhere. Then you get to season 2. Director changes. I think the director changes after season 1. Season 2 still has some of the goodness, and like this is where we start getting into like weird sub arcs where like they'll just introduce some new characters to be around for a few episodes, and those are fine, and a lot of those are from the manga because at this point the manga also started treading water. So like season 2 has good parts, some okay parts, but it overall feels like the progress comes to a halt. Then you get seasons 3 and 4, and they're mostly shit. This is where the production quality starts falling apart. We get introduced to some really obnoxious characters. Fucking Happosai, this old man whose whole thing is he just steals panties and he's a piece of shit and you hate him. And the school principal, who's like the same character, and they're just shit. And any episode that's focused on them is skippable. Don't watch it. Like, it's literally nothing will happen. But then every once in a while, all of a sudden, one of the best episodes of the show will appear, you know? So, like, you can't just completely skip seasons 3 and 4. You gotta, like, navigate them. Then you get to seasons 5 and 6, where the director changes again to someone who's good. And, like, the show picks up overall. Like, there's still some shitty episodes, but then there's more of, like, the great ones, and the overall bar is higher. The production picks up a little bit. So, like, throughout the whole show, there's, like, great and terrible stuff in there. And it's really hard to, like, judge it as a whole when it changes so much. I created an extensive episode guide for this show on my old blog. Like, basically boiling it down to, like, there are 60 must-watch episodes of the show. There's 130 or 119, something like that, like 119 good ones, 130 that are, like, at all worth watching, and then, like, 30 episodes that you should never watch. And that's kind of how I broke it down. So yeah, like, what would I score Ranma? I have no fucking idea. Like, because I do really like the concept. I really like the characters. I think when it's good, it's really good. It's like one of the better, rom-coms out there because it's just got such good ideas in the way it's structured and everything. But when it's bad, it's abysmal. So 7 or 8, I want to say, like, because I can ignore the bad episodes and, like, I have an episode guide where I could just watch the good ones and, like, that would still be a good show. I don't think it ever is above an 8 even at its best because it's not, like, you know, the greatest show of all time, but, like, I don't know. I think I'd give it like a 7 just to penalize it for the bad stuff, at least on some level. Martien, Successor, and Edesco. This was a show I made a big deal out of watching when I first saw it because, like, some people who I kind of looked up to considered this, like, their favorite show. And so I was really interested in it. And it's kind of a fascinating animal. It's a parody, if not a deconstruction, as much as that word shouldn't even exist. But, like, you know, if it's going to apply to anything, it's going to apply to this. Because the show really is going out of its way to, like, pull apart mecha tropes and show why they don't work, you know, like particularly super robot shows. Because it starts off as a really goofy sci-fi comedy show. Like, the characters are all really eccentric. It's like a starship that's being piloted by a bunch of, like, teenagers and idiots and stuff, and, like, people who don't know what they're supposed to be doing. But it's all very tongue-in-cheek. Like, you can tell that's the point. But then, in, like, episode 3, it suddenly takes a really dark turn, and it becomes like, oh, yeah, this kind of goofy story, this is what happens if you, like, put a bunch of dumbasses on a ship, or, like, or try to be powered by hot-blooded ideals. Like, it blows up in your face, you know? And then the show maintains being a comedy show. Like, even after that, it's still a parody. And so you've got this weird narrative that twists between, like, a dark surrounding story and a cast of goofy characters. And it goes in some really interesting directions. There's some really great episodes. The ending's kind of weird. It's kind of open-ended because there were supposed to be sequels, and there were, but not in the way that they were supposed to be. Like, there was, like, a sequel novel, and then a sequel video game, I think, and then a film that follows up from that. And so most people have just seen the film, which doesn't make sense if you haven't seen the other stuff, I guess. I haven't seen the film myself. And then I don't even know if the film has a proper ending. I don't know. I've heard conflicting things about it. I should just watch it myself and form my own opinion, but I haven't seen this show in forever. I'd probably give it an 8 or a 9. Like, I don't know if I'd appreciate it more or the same amount now. I liked it a lot when I watched it, but I did feel like some of it was going over my head. So if I would get even more of it out of it today, it'd probably be like a 9. But if not, it'll probably be an 8. Dragon Ball GT. I don't know why I have this listed as completed, because there's no way I've seen even, like, 64 episodes of it. When I first made my anime list, I did a lot of, like, accounting not for, like, how many episodes of the show I'd seen, but, like, how many episodes I have watched, if that makes sense. Like, rather than I've seen all 64, I have seen an episode 64 times. You know, like, that's how I thought of it when I first created the list, because I wanted my time measurements to be hyper accurate. So, like, and in the early days of Mal, you could actually list yourself as having seen more episodes than are in the show. So I'd have some shows that it would say, like, I've seen 35 out of 24 or something like that, because I counted every time I'd seen an episode twice. So with all the Dragon Ball shows, I haven't actually seen every episode of any Dragon Ball series. But I've seen so much random Dragon Ball on TV that I just marked all of them as completed. But, like, thinking back on it, I don't remember seeing that much of Dragon Ball GT. So, like, I highly doubt I even saw 64 episodes. So I would not feel comfortable rating this show. I remember thinking, because I was never the biggest Dragon Ball fan, and when the show came out, I guess a lot of Dragon Ball fans were super pissed off with it, and most people hated it. I remember thinking the concept was interesting, of, like, Goku's a kid again, and he's adventuring with his, his granddaughter, I guess? Yeah, and, like, they're out on an adventure. That's a cool idea, but the episodes I ended up seeing, I was just like, oh, I still don't care, you know? So, yeah, can't say I'm terribly interested in going back and finishing it, but I don't know how much of it I've seen, so, like, I'm not going to unmark it as completed, but I'm also not going to give it a rating. I have no idea what I'd rate it. Oh, now we're getting into fucking the Elfen Lied. Oh, we're actually at the end. Well, in the next episode, we'll be doing Elfen Lied, and actually the next stretch after Elfen Lied is, like, a bunch of shows that I really love, so that'll be interesting to talk about. Oh my god, the series is going really slow. I'll see you in the next one!